For years, customer first was one of the most powerful ideas in business. It sounded simple. Put the customer at the center, make decisions based on what's best for them, and everything else will follow. And for a long time, that approach worked. Companies that focused on customer experience, convenience, and satisfaction built strong brands. They earned loyalty. They grew quickly. But today, something is starting to shift. Customer first is still being used everywhere, but the meaning behind it is changing, and not in a good way. Because in many cases, companies are no longer truly putting customers first. They're optimizing around them. And there's a big difference. At first, this shift is hard to notice. Everything still looks customer-focused on the surface. The messaging is the same. The branding feels the same. The experience might even feel smooth. But underneath, the priorities have changed. Instead of asking what is best for the customer, many businesses are now asking a different question. How do we keep the customer paying? That subtle shift changes everything, because once the goal becomes maximizing retention and revenue, customer first can start to conflict with business incentives. And when that happens, the experience begins to change. One of the clearest examples is in pricing. Many companies still present themselves as customer-friendly, but pricing structures have become more complex. Hidden fees, tiered plans, feature gating, it's all designed to extract more value over time, not necessarily to serve the customer better, but to optimize revenue. Another example is subscriptions. Subscriptions can be convenient, but they also create dependency. And in some cases, companies make it harder to cancel than it is to sign up, not because it benefits the customer, but because it reduces churn. This is where the idea of customer first starts to break down. Because if a company truly puts the customer first, leaving should be just as easy as joining. But in many cases, it's not. And that's not accidental, it's strategic. There's also a shift happening in product design. Products are increasingly built to maximize engagement. Notifications, reminders, continuous updates, they're all designed to keep users coming back. Again, this can create value, but it can also create overuse. Because the goal is not just to help the customer, it's to keep the customer active. And active customers generate more data, more usage, and more revenue. So the incentives become clear. More engagement equals more value for the business, but not always for the customer. Then there's the issue of data. Companies collect more data than ever before. They use it to personalize experiences, improve products, and optimize performance. But they also use it to influence behavior, to guide decisions, to shape choices, sometimes in ways that are not fully visible to the customer. This creates an imbalance. Because while the company understands the customer deeply, the customer often doesn't fully understand how they are being influenced. And that raises an important question. Is that still customer first, or is it something else entirely? Another reason this shift is happening is because of pressure. Businesses today operate in a more competitive and demanding environment. Costs are higher, growth is harder. Investors expect results, so companies are under pressure to perform. And when that pressure increases, priorities can shift. Customer satisfaction is still important, but it's balanced against revenue, retention, and efficiency. And sometimes that balance tilts away from the customer. This is why you're seeing more subtle friction in experiences, harder cancellations, more upsells, more aggressive retention tactics. Not enough to push customers away immediately, but enough to increase lifetime value. It's a fine line, because companies can't ignore customers completely. If the experience becomes too frustrating, people will leave. So businesses are trying to optimize, not maximize customer happiness, but maximize customer retention. And that's a very different goal, because you don't need a perfectly happy customer to keep them. You just need a customer who is satisfied enough and finds it inconvenient to leave. And that's where the strategy becomes clear. Customer first is being replaced by customer stays. Not because companies stopped caring, but because the economics changed. Retention is more valuable than acquisition. Lifetime value matters more than one-time satisfaction, and that shifts how decisions are made. But this trend has consequences. Over time, customers start to notice. They may not always understand exactly what's changing, but they feel it. The experience becomes slightly less transparent, slightly less flexible, slightly more controlled. and trust can start to erode. Because true customer first is not just about keeping customers, it's about respecting them, making things clear, making things fair, making things easy, even when it means losing short-term revenue. And that's where many companies struggle, because doing what's best for the customer is not always what's best for the business in the short term. But in the long term, it often is. The challenge is that long-term thinking requires discipline. It requires resisting the temptation to optimize every interaction for revenue. It requires prioritizing trust over short-term gains, and not every company is willing to do that. So where does this leave us? Customer first is not disappearing, but it's evolving. In some cases, it's becoming more strategic than genuine, more about managing behavior than serving needs, and that's why it feels different. Because the words haven't changed, but the intent behind them has. And as customers become more aware of this shift, the companies that truly put customers first, not just in messaging, but in action, will stand out even more. Because in a world where customer first is becoming less clear, actually meaning it becomes a real competitive advantage.